Hi guys, my name is Matti Sulanto and I'm a photographer. And in this video I'd like to talk about retro camera designs. Are they good or are they bad? And the reason is of course the brand new Nikon ZF that was just released. It's the latest Nikon camera of course, but it's also the latest retro design camera in the market. There are also other retro, classic, vintage looking digital cameras in the market, and some of those are really popular. But does that retro design serve any other purpose than the looks? Those cameras look pretty, but are they any better than modern designs? I guess it was Fujifilm who started it all with their X100 back in 2010. I think it was the only, or not the only, the first retro classic looking digital camera. Before that, at least I don't remember that there were any similar designs. And later Fuji made that retro style sort of almost like a trademark. And it seems to have been a good decision because Fuji today has a very strong loyal fan base, and some of those fans even claim that Fuji cameras have a soul, but I guess I better not say anything more on that. I'll just leave it as it is. I think it's better left alone. But anyway, the new Nikon ZF is not Nikon's first retro-looking camera. Back in 2013, 10 years ago, they released the Nikon DF, which as far as I can remember was not a huge success. And at least to me it was a little bit confusing camera. It tried to look a lot like a retro camera, but all in all the usability and the design was, in my opinion, sort of halfway retro. So it was not a proper retro, but it was not a proper contemporary design either. And of course back in 2021 Nikon released the ZF-C, which is an APS-C camera that looks a lot like the new ZF. And of course then there was the Olympus Pen F back in 2016. I think it looked really cool, or still looks really cool, but I was not too crazy about that JPEG-centric design. But I'm aware that many people love that camera just because of those JPEG features. I just didn't like that. And also the original OMD EM5 had some retro vibes in the design, but in my opinion it was not a proper retro design because the controls didn't have any analog hints. The control dials were just like on any other modern digital camera. It was a good looking camera nonetheless. But is retro, classic, vintage looking design just eye candy? Or does it serve other purposes too, like usability? I think usability is very important, if not one of the most important factors in any camera. And if the usability is bad or the ergonomics are bad, then it's a bad design. But what actually is a retro design camera? I think we all agree that a retro design camera, digital camera, should look like a film camera as much as a digital camera can look like a film camera. A little bit angular design and those analog looking dials for shutter speed, ISO, and then perhaps an aperture ring around the lens too. I think those are the key elements for a retro design. Traditional camera manufacturers, like Nikon for example, I think they have a better starting point with the retro design because they can use their past in the marketing and they can sort of make the new model look like one of their popular film cameras back in the day. For example, the new Nikon ZF looks a lot like the Nikon FM film camera, which was a beautiful, simple camera with only the basic features you needed for good photos. Nothing more, nothing less. A very, very nice camera. And no wonder it was so popular, and it still is popular. Like I have used their M rangefinder camera design, the same design almost pretty much forever, and also their Q, the Leica Q, has the same design language, and it makes both cameras immediately recognizable as Leica. For example, Sony would have to come up with some sort of imaginary vintage model if they wanted to go for retro, the same way Olympus did with their Pen F. To my knowledge, the Pen F did not look like any previous old Olympus film camera. It looked more like an old Leica or some other old rangefinder camera. But people loved it anyway, so I don't think a role model from the past is necessary for a vintage retro-looking camera to be a success. But I think it's helpful in the marketing anyway. I generally like retro designs, and those analog-looking dials, they let you see all your settings even if your camera is powered off. And you can also dial in whatever settings you wish, even if your camera is powered off. And I think it's very nice and practical too. Sometimes I hate it when I have to turn my camera on and maybe open up the rear screen to be able to see my settings. And also those retro designs, they look good, at least to me, because I grew up with film cameras, and those retro lines, they bring back so many good memories and good feelings from the past. However, as soon as you start using those retro-looking cameras, most of them, they feel like any digital camera. The user experience is not that special compared to another digital camera. For example, the Fuji X-T30 that I had, it was exactly like that. It was a really good looking camera, and I mostly liked that camera. However, the user experience was not that different from my other cameras like my Sony or Lumix or whatever camera. It was nothing that special, and somehow the good looks or the vintage look or analog controls, they did not translate to any kind of a special user experience, at least with that camera. Those film cameras back in the day, they were really simple devices and much simpler than any digital camera. And I think that's one of the problems with modern retro vintage looking digital cameras. They can't be that simple. You have your dials for the shutter speed, ISO, exposure compensation, and maybe even the aperture ring around the lens. But at least Fuji, and it looks like Nikon too, they also have two other command dials. And I think that's way too many dials, and it can be confusing. And I particularly hate it if I have two different dials or switches doing the same thing, adjusting the same setting on my camera. It's very confusing, and it just leaves more room for errors. Of course, you can disable some of those dials, but why include them in the first place? The whole camera would be easier to use if there were less dials. I think the manufacturers, they just try to please too many people at the same time. They think maybe that if someone does not like those analog traditional dials, then they can use those front finger and thumb dials. But I think sometimes you just have to be bold and not try to please too many at the same time. I think Leica have succeeded really well with their retro looking design. They keep it really simple. There are only few dials and buttons, but everything you need is there. Nothing is missing. And it keeps me wondering why no other manufacturer manages to do the same thing. But I guess it's not that easy to design something that is simple but functional. And also, like I said, I think especially Japanese manufacturers, they try to please too many people at the same time. I guess there is a reason why all pro-level cameras have a modern contemporary user interface and control layout. And even Fujifilm have opted for that in their GFX series medium format cameras. Maybe that has proved to be the best in those often fast-paced situations that a professional commercial photographers face in their work. They have to be able to operate their camera without thinking too much about the camera itself. They have to be able to concentrate on the situation in hand. And maybe it's not that important for a professional tool to look cool as long as it's enjoyable to use and delivers the photos reliably. However, not all of us are fast-paced commercial shooters. Many of us just shoot for our own enjoyment, and we do not have the same requirements for our gear as a top-level professional shooter. I certainly don't mind if my camera looks good and pleases my eye. If there were two almost identical cameras on paper, but the other one looked so much better to me, I would definitely take the better looking camera, and I might even pay a little bit more for that better looking design. So I'd say I probably like retro designs more than I dislike retro designs. But I don't want heavily compromised handling and ergonomics either. I would not choose any retro design just for the sake of retro. But if that design manages to combine the classic good looks and excellent usability, then it's a winner for me. The retro has to be able to offer more than just the good looks, preferably somehow unique user experience, for example. But as always, I'd like to hear your opinion too. Do you like retro design cameras or do you dislike them? Please do leave a comment down below. This is all I have for you today. Very important, and if you found this very important opinion or discussion entertaining or helpful, please do consider buying me a cup of coffee. There's a link down below for that if you don't live in Finland. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next video.